From a radioactive apartment to the Soviet Union's nuclear testing site, in this video, we take a look at the 15 most radioactive places in the world. Number 15. Acerinox scrap metal plant, Spain. The Acerinox accident was an incident of radioactive contamination in Spain. At the end of May in 1998, a cesium-137 source managed to pass through the monitoring equipment at the scrap metal reprocessing plant. When it melted, the cesium-137 caused the release of radioactive clouds that were detected thousands of miles away in France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. The radioactive levels measured were up to 1,000 times higher than normal. The accident contaminated the whole scrap metal reprocessing plant, plus 2 other steel mills that were close by. The radioactive ash produced in the accident measured between 640 and 1,020 becquerels per gram. For reference, the normal European safe level is just 10 becquerels per gram, so the ash that was released was high enough to be considered a real threat to public health. Number 14. Church Rock Uranium Mill, USA. The Church Rock uranium mill spill occurred in the US state of New Mexico on the 16th of July, 1979, when the United Nuclear Corporation's disposal pond and its uranium mill in Church Rock breached its dam. The accident remains the largest release of radioactive material in the US history. The spill released more than 1,100 tons of solid radioactive mill waste and over 94 million US gallons of acidic radioactive tailing solution into the Puerco River. An estimated 1.36 short tons of uranium traveled over 80 miles downstream to the Navajo County, Arizona, and onto the Navajo Nation. On top of the radioactive and acidic waste, the spill also contained toxic metals and sulfates. The spill contaminated groundwater and rendered the Puerco River unusable for local residents. The local Navajo people were not warned of the toxic spill and its dangers until many days after it happened. The governor of New Mexico at the time, Bruce King, refused the Navajo Nation's request that the site be declared a federal disaster area. By doing this, he limited the aid local residents would receive. Number 13. Mailuu-Suu, Kyrgyzstan. Unlike other places on this list, this one is not a testing site, production facility, or power station. It is in fact a uranium mine. Throughout the Cold War, a large mining operation was undertaken by the Soviet Union in an area of the country we now call Kyrgyzstan. Over 10,000 tons of uranium ore was excavated and extracted from the ground here. When the mine was shut down, large amounts of contaminated waste and radioactive mining materials were buried next to the mine. Although they didn't manage to bury everything, and much of the contaminated equipment remains on the surface today. A 1999 study found that twice as many local residents suffered from some form of cancer as the national average. The region is prone to seismic activity, and many locals fear that one day an earthquake could expose the radioactive materials, causing them to contaminate local river systems, potentially leading to even more health problems for the area. Number 12. Bombark Site, McGuire Air Force Base, USA. On the 7th of June, 1960, an explosion rocked McGuire Air Force Base. A helium tank had exploded. The tank was located between a missile's fuel tanks, causing a serious fire in a liquid-fueled, nuclear-tipped Bombark missile. At the time, in 1960, officials claimed that this explosion didn't cause any contamination and posed absolutely no environmental threats. However, it was later revealed in 2007 by the US Environmental Protection Agency that McGuire Air Force Base is one of the most contaminated and radioactive bases in the country. It's reported that to this day, a 75-acre area has been fenced off due to high levels of contamination from weapons-grade plutonium and highly enriched and depleted uranium. Number 11. Paralana Springs, Australia. These subterranean springs, located in the Arikula Wilderness Sanctuary in southern Australia, hide a very scary secret. As the water bubbles up to the spring's surface, the the water passes through granite rocks that contain highly elevated levels of uranium. This uranium gives off heat during its radioactive decay. The local government have warned that staying near the springs for any prolonged period of time may constitute a serious health hazard. To make things even worse, a mining company that has been mining the uranium underground has been found guilty of illegally dumping vast amounts of radioactive waste in a variety of areas across the wilderness sanctuary. Number 10. Goiania accident, Brazil. In September of 1987, in Goiania, Brazil, a forgotten radiotherapy machine was taken from an abandoned hospital site in the city. The stolen radiotherapy machine was then dismantled and then handled by many people throughout the city. This theft tragically resulted in 4 deaths from exposure to radiation. Once authorities became aware of the incident, around 112,000 people were examined for radioactive contamination, and 249 of them were found to have been exposed and contaminated. The following cleanup operation resulted in huge quantities of topsoil being removed from multiple sites. Several hundred houses had to be demolished, and the objects from within those houses, including personal possessions, were seized and incinerated. Time magazine has identified this accident as one of the world's worst nuclear-related disasters, and the International Atomic Energy Agency called it one of the worst radiological incidents ever. Number 9. Kramatorsk apartment, Ukraine. In 1989, in a small city located in the east of Ukraine, a tiny capsule containing highly radioactive cesium-137 was found inside a concrete wall of an apartment building. Officials think that this radioactive capsule had been in the wall for over 9 years. They somehow managed to track down the source of the capsule. It had originally been part of a radiation level gauge, but the gauge had somehow gotten lost in the Krasinski quarry. Gravel from that quarry was then used in the construction of the apartment building. By the time the capsule had been discovered, 4 residents of the building had died from leukemia, and 17 more had been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. The accident was only detected after residents requested that the level of radiation be measured in the apartment. Part of the wall was removed and sent to the Institute for Nuclear Research, where the capsule was taken out of the wall and disposed of. Number 8. Siberian Chemical Combine, Russia. During the Soviet Union, the Siberian Chemical Combine was a production facility for the creation of nuclear weapon components, mainly using highly enriched uranium and plutonium to produce nuclear warhead components. The site played an important role in the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons program, but as the Cold War ended, the site ceased production of weapons components. The facility does still produce Russia's supply of low-enriched uranium fuel, but the reason it's on this list is because the facility is one of the largest sites in the world for nuclear waste storage. Current estimates claim there are more than 30 million cubic meters of nuclear waste stored at this site, making it truly one of the most radioactive places on Earth. Number 7. The Hanford Site USA. The Hanford Site, located in the state of Washington in the United States of America, is a decommissioned nuclear production complex that is operated by the United States federal government. Established in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project, this site was home to the first ever full-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. Plutonium manufactured at this site was used in the Fat Man bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki, Japan. During the Cold War, the Hanford site expanded, producing plutonium for most of the 60,000 nuclear weapons built at that time. Many of the early safety procedures and waste disposal practices were truly inadequate, and government documents have confirmed that Hanford's operation released significant amounts of radioactive materials into the local area. It's widely known today as the most radioactive place in America. The site holds an estimated 2/3 of the volume of the country's high-level radioactive waste, much of it buried underground. However, locals fear that this radioactive waste has been contaminating the groundwater for over 70 years now. Number 6. Sellafield, UK. In the 1950s and 60s, Sellafield produced weapons-grade nuclear material for the United Kingdom's weapons program during the Cold War. It was also the first nuclear power station in the world to generate electricity on an industrial scale. Today, it is one of the largest nuclear reprocessing, waste and decommissioning sites in the world. It's reported that this plant releases around 8 million litres of contaminated wastewater into the sea on a daily basis. For this reason, the Irish government, along with the Isle of Man and Norway, have campaigned the British government to shut down Sellafield. Number 5. Somalian Coast, Africa. It's claimed that the Italian criminal organisation called the Ndrangheta have been illegally dumping nuclear and toxic waste around the world for decades. In the 1980s, the Italian government introduced rigorous environmental legislation to protect the environment and the public's health from potential radioactive and toxic waste. This made legally disposing of radioactive waste and toxic materials expensive and time-consuming. So corrupt and greedy businesses just paid the Italian mafia to dispose of the waste for a much lower price. They started just dumping the waste off the Italian coast in the Mediterranean Sea. The criminal organizations quickly moved on to shipping the nuclear and toxic waste around the world, most of it ending up at the Somalian coast. They've dumped hundreds of barrels of toxic and nuclear waste there. Somalia is one of the poorest countries in the world. The people there already suffer a great deal, but now, thanks to the Italian mafia, they have to deal with highly radioactive and toxic waste washing up on their shores and polluting their seas. Number 4. The Polygon Kazakhstan. The Semipalatinsk test site, also known as the Polygon, was the primary testing site for the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons. Located in northeast Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union conducted 456 nuclear tests here between 1949 and 1989. They showed almost no regard to the effect the nuclear tests would have on the local people or the environment. The full, devastating impact of the radiation exposure was hidden for many years by Soviet authorities and has only started to come to light since the collapse of the Soviet Union. From 1996 to 2012, a secret joint operation of nuclear scientists and engineers from Kazakhstan, Russia and the United States set about to collect and secure all the waste plutonium that had been left throughout the area. This operation had to be kept a secret because officials feared that criminals and rogue governments would try to obtain this nuclear waste for sinister purposes. Number 3. The Kyshtym disaster, Russia. The Kyshtym disaster was a radioactive contamination accident that occurred on the 29th of September 1957 at the Mayak plutonium production site in southwest Russia, which was then part of the Soviet Union. The disaster measured as a level 6 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, making it the third most serious nuclear accident ever recorded. The cooling system in one of the tanks containing 70 to 80 tons of liquid radioactive waste failed. The temperature in the tank started to rise, resulting in evaporation and then a chemical explosion of the dried waste. The resulting explosion is estimated to have had a force to the equivalence of around 100 tons of TNT. The fallout of the explosion and the radioactive cloud that followed reached over 350 kilometers or 220 miles away from the accident site. It created a 20,000 kilometer square contamination zone. At least 22 villages were exposed to high levels of radiation, with a total population of 10,000 people being evacuated from the area. The disaster spread hot radioactive particles over an area where at least 270,000 people lived. Since the Mayak production site was not marked on any official maps, the disaster was named after Kyshtym, which was the closest town that could be found on a map. Number 2. Fukushima Daini Nuclear Power Plant, Japan. When a 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan in 2011, it overwhelmed the existing safety features on the Fukushima Daini nuclear power plant, causing the worst power plant disaster since Chernobyl. The power plant did initially survive the earthquake. However, the resulting tsunami was more than twice the maximum tolerance of the power plant's design. This overwhelming tsunami caused the power plant's seawater pumps, which were designed to keep the nuclear reactors cool, to shut down and fail. This failure led to Fukushima's 3 nuclear reactors to leak radioactive material, as well as causing huge spillovers of the plant's contaminated wastewater. Most of this radioactive contamination went straight back into the Pacific Ocean. The disaster was given a Level 7 event classification by the International Nuclear Event Scale. The only other disaster to be given this rating was Chernobyl. An extensive cleanup operation is still going on today. Their aim is to decontaminate affected areas and fully decommission the power plant. Experts predict that they still have 30 to 40 years of cleaning up to do until the area will be safe again. Number 1. Chernobyl, Pripyat, Ukraine. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the number 4 nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in north of Ukraine. It is considered the worst nuclear disaster in history and is one of the only 2 nuclear energy disasters rated at 7, which is the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The accident started during a safety test of the RBMK-type nuclear reactor. The test was a simulation of an electrical power outage. The test was delayed by 10 hours, so the operating shift that had been prepared was not present. The test supervisor then failed to follow the correct procedures, creating unstable operating conditions. When combined with inherent reactor design flaws, resulted in an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. A large amount of energy was suddenly released, vaporizing superheated cooling water and rupturing the reactor core in a highly destructive steam explosion. This was then immediately followed by an open-air reactor core fire that released considerable airborne radioactive contamination. A 10-kilometer or 6.2-mile exclusion zone was created 36 hours after the accident. Around 49,000 people were evacuated from the area, primarily from Pripyat. The exclusion zone was later increased to 30 kilometers or 19 miles, and a further 68,000 people were evacuated from the wider area. The Chernobyl disaster is considered to be the worst nuclear power plant accident in history, both in terms of cost and casualties. The resulting cleanup operation involved more than 500,000 people and cost an estimated 18 billion Soviet rubles, which in today's money is roughly $68 billion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this video. If you would like to read more on any of the subjects I've talked about, I'll leave some links down below in the description for you to read. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much for watching.